When Dylan moved to Lakeview, he was too young to remember where they had lived before. Not that it mattered much, it was just a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, New York. For the rest of the family, the move was a welcome change. His parents, Diane and Ron, embraced the quiet life. Diane was a stay-at-home mom, and Ron was a police officer. Their income was modest, but it was enough to provide for the family and a few luxuries now and then. Lakeview was a small, eerie town in upstate New York, enveloped in a sense of isolation. The community was tight-knit, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Yet, surprisingly, few people knew about the tower in the woods, a place where people dared not venture. The tower loomed off the dimly lit river road, a path that ran parallel to a foul-smelling wetland. Every traveler on that road was greeted by the musty, decaying odor that seeped from the woods. It was enough to deter anyone, and most avoided the road and the woods entirely. Another street bypassed the forest, making River Road almost obsolete, except for the fact that it led straight to Dylan's house. Kids, however, were a different story. When Dylan turned 9, the woods became his playground. Building forts, naming paths, climbing trees, and skipping rocks through the swampy water, the pungent smell didn't bother him. In fact, it comforted him, wrapping him in a familiar embrace. To Dylan, it was just a small, safe haven. He made a few friends at school, though he was far from popular. Allison and Carter were his closest companions. After school, they would come over, do homework, and dream about starting a band and becoming the most famous people the world had ever seen. A few weeks into 5th grade, Dylan decided to share his secret sanctuary with his friends. Sitting in his room one day, he nervously said, "All right, guys, you know the woods up the road?" Allison and Carter looked puzzled but nodded. "Those woods? No one goes in there. I've had the place all to myself for a while, but I really want to show you guys the cool stuff in there." Excited and anxious, Dylan led the way. His friends, though hesitant, followed suit. He announced to his mother that they were heading into the woods. She smiled, her eyes fixed on the phone, and mouthed, "Be careful." The door closed behind them, and they trekked to the edge of the woods, where the stench hit them like a brick wall. Dylan inhaled deeply and let out a satisfied exhale, motioning for his friends to follow him. They followed the familiar path Dylan had carved out, arriving at the fort he had built months ago. Adding a few sticks, Dylan proudly proclaimed, "This is my castle." Allison and Carter stared wide-eyed at the rickety structure. Carter was the first to explore inside. "Cool, man. You've got videotapes," he yelled from within. Dylan's proud smile faded as Carter emerged, holding a VHS tape. "Why'd you bring this tape out here? You can't even watch it," Carter questioned, puzzled. Dylan stared at the tape, confused. "I didn't bring that out here. Someone else must have found my fort." His realization cast a shadow over his excitement. The silence that followed was broken by Allison's excited voice. "Maybe they left it for us to find, like a treasure hunt." Carter nodded eagerly, and Dylan's smile began to return, though unease lingered in the air. The woods held secrets, and the tape was just the beginning. "Yeah," Dylan replied. "There's just one area across the swamp that I've never gone to because I can't cross." The group agreed their mission was to find a way across the water to meet this other wanderer of the woods. They paced along the edge of the water, brainstorming furiously. "Maybe we can build a bridge," Carter suggested. No, it would never work." "It's too far across," Dylan dismissed. Houston was about to offer another idea when a loud crack echoed through the air. They turned to see a broken road jutting out of the ground, snapped in half. It pointed towards an area of the water that split into a series of creeks. They walked over and noticed a pre-existing structure, a thin, zigzagging bridge barely visible above the murky waters. An audible gasp escaped from Dylan as he eagerly stepped onto the narrow 4-inch wide bridge. The bridge was broken in several places, requiring them to jump across creeks and maneuver through thick thorn bushes. After a tense 20 minutes, they made it across. Before them stood a large stone tower surrounded by a flat concrete clearing covered in leaves. The area was circular and encircled by creeks, almost like the moat of a castle. Excitement surged through the group as they approached the structure. They reached the door and, without hesitation, pushed it open. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upwards, light bulbs embedded in the walls. Dylan flipped a switch near the door, but nothing happened. Undeterred, they climbed the stairs. At the top, the staircase opened into a makeshift kitchen. In front of them were a few cabinets, a microwave, and a large sink. Next to the sink were tools that looked like they belonged in a dentist's office and a few empty bottles of bleach. Confused, they explored the kitchen, opening cabinets and turning on the faucet. Water flowed, and Dylan asked, "How do you think they got running water all the way up here?" His friends shrugged, equally puzzled. They continued their inspection, finding a heavy steel door covered in padlocks and deadbolts, all aligned. The door felt almost hidden, adding to their sense of adventure. More excited than ever, Houston pushed it open. Inside were tall bookshelves filled with VHS tapes, each labeled with names and dates. They were ordered alphabetically: Alex 92, Reed 1, Andrew 99, another. There was a gap before a tape labeled Brian 95. Their excitement turned to confusion as they continued their search. A small television sat in the corner, a dirty old notebook on top of it. Allison flipped through the notebook's pages. "It's just a whole bunch of names," she said, showing the others. Carter walked over and, with a giggle, added his name below the rest. Satisfied, they resumed their search. Dylan found a box of old camera equipment and showed it to his friends. They were just as confused as he was. Carter, still holding the VHS tape he had found in Dylan's fort, examined it closely. The tape's label was blank, but written in black marker was Brandon. Carter's face turned pale. "Brandon Dunn?" he whispered. Dylan, confused, asked, "Who's that?" Carter's voice trembled. "My brother. He went missing in 2001. He never came home from school. They found his car." He choked up, then cleared his throat. Silence fell over the room. Carter, in a daze, walked to the television. He turned it on and inserted the tape. No one protested. They knew they couldn't stop him. The screen flickered to life, and the grainy footage began to play, revealing secrets the woods had hidden for years. Houston and Dylan exchanged wary glances, dread pooling in their stomachs. The tape started, showing a room with gray walls and an empty bed covered in white sheets, a worn stuffed bear sitting at its center. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9, entered with a backpack. Climbing onto the bed, he hugged the bear and murmured, "So I did leave you in the fort, Grizzly." He smiled to himself, looking around. The kids watching the video were baffled. The boy looked into the camera, confused, when a loud slam reverberated through the speakers, startling him. Quick, heavy footsteps followed, and a large man appeared on screen. The boy's expression turned to horror, his knuckles white from clutching the bear. The man stood over the boy, breathing heavily, and caressed his face. Then he climbed under the bed. Dylan, Carter, and Allison turned away, terrified they'd witnessed the man hurting the boy. They bolted from the room, stumbling into another door. Its white paint was chipped and peeling. Trembling and confused, Carter opened the door. They froze at the sight, a camera lying on the floor, a bed covered in white sheets stained with huge copper-colored blotches, and in the corner, the same stuffed bear from the video. Carter began to cry. They ran out, racing down the stairs into the clearing. Through the trees, they could see the road on the other side of the woods. As the sun dipped below the horizon, roots and branches seemed to reach for them. Allison leaped over a small creek, scrambling up a hill through the trees to safety. Dylan followed but stopped to wait for Carter, who was hysterical and moving slower. Carter jumped, and Dylan saw a root wrap around his friend's foot. Carter fell whimpering. Dylan grabbed his friend's hand, looking into his terror-filled, tear-streaked eyes. Dylan swore he saw Carter being dragged into the foliage. He tried to run and help when a loud scream echoed from the tower, amplified through the speakers of the television. Paralyzed by fear, Dylan ran up a hill meeting Allison. Both were crying and screaming for help when an elderly woman found them. The police investigation was swift. They ventured into the woods and discovered the tower. It turned out to be part of an old sewage treatment plant, abandoned in the mid-80s. The woods had always reeked of decay. When the police reviewed the tapes, they identified the children as missing from around the country. They never found Carter. They searched the woods and found the bodies of the children from the tapes, lying at the bottom of the swamp. No one had ever questioned the putrid smell of the swamp. They had always avoided it. All the bodies were there except for Brendan's. His body had been found years ago in a dumpster in the next town over, only 3 days after being reported missing. They had never searched the woods. Dylan swore to the police that he saw the earth drag his friend away, but they dismissed it as the imagination of a traumatized child. The man in the tapes was identified as Kenneth Brown. He had been found hanging in his apartment 3 years ago, his room filled with stuffed animals.